What's up, friends? Welcome back to the channel. I'm Dave from Chase the Summit, and today we're going to be going through a whole bunch of data. Just a couple of weeks ago, both my wife Jen and I visited a local fitness lab to do a full rundown on our current fitness level with VO2 Max and lactic threshold, along with some imbalances we might have on force plates, and we also did running gait analysis. You see, my wife Jen is actually training for the Boston Marathon right now. That's only a couple of months away, and I'm training for 2 100-mile ultra marathons and some 50Ks this spring and summer season. And to be totally honest with you, my training lately has not been awesome. It's currently winter in New England right now. It's icy, it's cold, it's snowy. I have 4 kids. We've got sports and birthdays and all the things going on, so I've kind of fallen off the wagon a little bit. And of course, I could keep all of this data to myself, but what fun would that be? I'm sharing this video for 3 main reasons. First of all, the data is super impressive and interesting. Hopefully you're a nerd like me and you enjoy this sort of thing. Secondly, I wanted to know where I stand right now before I enter my next training block and lead up to all of my races, to know where I can improve and where my deficits are. And the third reason is for you. This might give you some insight and understanding on how all of these tests work, because a lot of people out there don't quite understand it, including myself. I'll do my best in this video today. It might answer some of the questions on what they are and what they can do and whether or not you should do this sort of thing for yourself. It can be super valuable for the right person. If you're an aspiring athlete who is gearing up for their next race, or even if you're just somebody getting off the couch and you have some goals in the future and you want to know where you stand now and where you could be in the future. Oh yeah, and one more thing for those of you wondering, since this channel is all about fitness tech, yes, I will be making another video in the near future where I will be comparing all of the data and test results from this experience to my wearable devices. That could be the Garmins, the Apples, the COROSes, the Suuntos, and more. So stay tuned for that video in the near future. Make sure to subscribe for that coming down the road. And that brings me into the next topic. Before we move on, I do want to give a huge shout out to the facility that did all this testing. It's called Human Powered Health, and they do have 4 different locations. There's 2 here in Massachusetts, 1 in Boston, 1 in Wellesley, Massachusetts, right on the Boston Marathon route. And they do have additional locations in Minnesota and Arizona as well. I'll have a link in the description down below so you can check them out. This video is not sponsored by them at all, but they did lend us the lab for the whole day, so I do really appreciate that. Definitely check them out if you're interested in this sort of thing. Oh yeah, and one more thing before we dive into all the data here. Full disclosure, full disclaimer, I'm not a doctor, I'm not a coach, I'm not a physiologist. In fact, I don't understand a lot of this stuff for myself. I'm doing my best, and I'll do my best to explain it to you, but if I do make a mistake, make sure to correct me in the comments down below, because I'm still learning, and hopefully we can all join in the learning process. With all of that out of the way, let's set some groundwork for this video. The tests that we did at Human Powered Health were as follows. First, we started with resting metabolic rate. Then we went into running gait analysis. We also jumped on the force plates. I'll explain this all later in this video. We did a lactic threshold test and a VO2 max test, which, whew, that was a lot. Before we get to the torture though, let's run through the tests that we did when we first entered the facility. The first one was resting metabolic rate. And if you don't know what resting metabolic rate is, it's essentially how many calories your body consumes at rest. So if I were to lay in bed as a 40-year-old man of my height and weight, how many calories would I burn? There is a generic calculation for this based on your height, your weight, and your age that you can look up online. But generally speaking, that generic calculation is not super accurate if you are of the active pursuit. So for me, I run just about every day, or I try to at least, and the fitter you are and more active you are, the more calories your body will burn at rest. Why would you need to know this? Well, there is a lot of importance here. If you can understand your exact resting metabolic rate, it can help you fuel your training. A lot of people out there are on diets, they're trying to cut weight or not gain weight, but if you're someone who's super active, you need to fuel yourself. You need to keep that fuel coming in. So even on inactive days, you may need to eat more than a different person that isn't as active. And on top of that, understanding your RMR can also help you for longer efforts. Like for me, I do run ultra marathons. So if I know my RMR and I know how many calories I'll be consuming throughout the race, I'll know how many gels I should be throwing down to compensate for that. Now that we've talked about what resting metabolic rate is, how do they actually test for it? Well, it was actually pretty pleasant. What they make you do is actually wear a mask that's hooked up to a machine that's calculating your breathing rate. And on top of that, they're also taking your heart rate at the same time. You basically just have to sit in a chair with a mask on for about 30 minutes to an hour, and then they'll tell you to relax and not use your phone or do anything to exert any effort, basically. I will say, in a busy world with 4 kids and all the things that we do, it was actually kind of nice to just sit there and do nothing for a little while. It might have been my favorite part of the day. After that period of sitting and wearing the mask, my physiologist, Evan, explained the results, and it was super interesting. If I were to take the generic calculation that you can find online for my resting metabolic rate, as a 40-year-old man that's about 150 pounds and 5'7", it would turn out to be around 1,500 calories. That's sort of the generic number that you get from an online calculator. However, during this RMR test, it was revealed to me that I burn over 2,200 calories. That is super interesting. Based on all of this data, my physiologist Evan took the numbers and did some math and crunching to come up with what I should be consuming on a daily basis to keep up with my current activity level. And he told me I should eat between 3,400 and 4,200 calories per day to fuel my activities. Of course, that spectrum is going to change on a given day. If it's a rest day, it'll be on the lower side of that, but if it's on a long run day, it'll certainly be on the higher side of that. Hey there, quick interruption. If you're finding this video fun or helpful or entertaining, please consider going down and giving me a thumbs up and subscribing to the channel down below, because that really helps me out. And also check out all of the links in the description down below where you can follow me on all the other platforms. Okay. Back to the video. Moving into the next test, the running gait analysis. This was really cool. So your running gait is super important to help you run most efficiently and to improve your running economy to avoid injury and fatigue. The way they do this test is they use a series of 3D sensors and cameras around a treadmill to monitor how you run and your gait in real time at different speeds. At first, Evan had me jump on the treadmill and run at a pretty chill pace, but by the end of it, we were up at like a 6-minute pace to see how my body would react at a higher speed. Diving into the results though, this is where things got super interesting. You see, after all this testing, Human Powered Health actually emails you a link where you can access all of this data and see your trends over time. And for running gait specifically, they actually have a breakdown of all of your running gait and mechanics. They have videos of you running and a 3D rendering of your skeleton running at different paces. So you can see where your flaws are as you speed up. And in all of this data, they actually have a test scale that ranges from being an eco sprinter, a quick stepper, a constant glider, an easy strider, or some other variables. And they sort of categorize you depending on how you run. Ultimately, my biomechanics during this test landed me in the quick stepper category, which means I don't have like a super long stride. I take a lot of steps. I have a high cadence, which is a good and a bad thing. If I want to run a super fast 5K or 10K, it showed me I do need to adjust my running gait to keep up with that increased speed, because keeping my cadence so high is sort of a limiting factor when you get up into those higher speeds. On the flip side though, Evan, the physiologist that was helping me, told me that this is not a bad result for someone who runs ultramarathon and runs on trails, because having a higher cadence in a quick stepping motion and biomechanics can actually help you with injury and fatigue over time. So I need to sort of balance this out, but definitely increase my bounding sprint workouts and do more interval and hill stuff during my training. Let's dive into the next test. This was the force plates, and probably the worst test for me in this whole experience. So what are force plates? Well, this was super interesting. Basically, on the ground in the facility, they had these metal plates with rubber on top of them, and these can actually measure your output from your legs when you're doing jumps or bounding off the ground. And the whole purpose of this test is to help you identify if you have any muscle weakness or imbalance between both of your legs. If you're pushing off more on one leg than the other, that can be a sign of muscle weakness or overcompensating, which could lead to injury in the long term. And I sort of knew I was in trouble for this test because years ago, I actually fell off a ladder and broke my kneecap, and I had surgery on my left knee, which resulted in a long-term experience of chronic knee problems. And the way this test is performed, basically I just had to do a series of jumps when a beep went off in the distance, and I would have to load up and explode off of the force plates. At first, I did this several times with both legs to see where my imbalances were, but then after that we did single leg jumps where I'd do left leg and right leg independently. And boy, I'll tell you right now, when it came to my left leg and doing a single leg jump, It was really uncomfortable, and the results show. So what was my personal takeaway with the force plates test? Well, it showed me I definitely have a muscle imbalance with my left leg, and I'm overcompensating with my right leg. My physiologist did make some suggestions to improve on this by adding plyometrics to my workout routine on a weekly basis and trying some bounding running intervals to mix into that. With force plates out of the way, we're getting into the good stuff and where things got to be a little bit of a torture situation, the lactate threshold test. If you don't know what a lactate threshold test is, it's basically an assessment that determines how intense your exercise can get before your body begins to produce too much lactic acid faster than your body can purge it out. Lactate is a byproduct of muscle metabolism. It's basically when your muscles are eating themselves, kind of. And if your legs and your muscles are accumulating too much and your body isn't purging it out, that's when things can get pretty miserable. Muscle weakness, fatigue, nausea, vomiting, rapid breathing, all to say it's pretty much the bonk. If you're an ultra runner, you know what that is. And the whole goal of a lactic threshold test is to identify where that threshold is, where that lactate threshold starts to accumulate too fast before your body can get rid of it. And that's identified in both your beats per minute for your heart rate and your running pace. When it comes to the lactate threshold test, this is where things get pretty interesting because the process by which they test for it is kind of gross. You basically go on a treadmill and you run at varying speeds and keep increasing your speeds until the point of being pretty fatigued and feeling pretty tired. And during this time, my physiologist actually poked a hole in my finger with a little finger prick, and then he took a sample of my blood on 2 different machines to measure buildup in my blood. This test just keeps continuing and continuing until you hit your threshold, which is identified on those little machines. And the cool thing about lactate testing is that there's 2 different outputs. First of all, you understand your heart rate zones, so you can actually put that into your GPS watch or incorporate that into your training so you know all of your heart rate zones. But what about my lactate threshold? Though that's identified in 2 different phases. There's your LT1, that's your lower threshold, which for me was 6.8 miles per hour or around an 8-minute, 45-second mile. And my LT1 heart rate was 146 beats per minute. Now jumping over to the LT2, that's the higher threshold. And for me, that resulted at 8.1 miles per hour or a 7.5 minute mile pace. And my LT2 heart rate was 158 beats per minute. And based on all of this data, my physiologist gave me some feedback on how I could improve this. He said, based on my lactate profile, it would make sense to conduct more polarized training to push my threshold higher so that we can make more room between my LT1 and LT2. They recommend that I should do some threshold intervals. This type of workout would look like 3 to 5 sets of 3 to 5 minutes above that 7:30 pace. And then after each set, he recommended that I let my heart rate come back down into zone 1 and then do it all over again 3 to 5 times. With the lactic threshold out of the way, let's go into the other piece of the pie. And this was the hardest test of the day for both Jen and I. VO2 Max. If you wear a fitness watch like me, I've got a Garmin here, but if you have a COROS, a Polar, a Suunto, or even an Apple Watch, all of these devices typically give you some feedback in the form of estimated VO2 Max. A lot of people don't know what this is and sort of look at it as just a gauge of their fitness based on a 0 to 100 scale sort of thing, but that's not really the case. And when it comes to test results, VO2 Max is expressed in milliliters of oxygen per kilogram of body weight per minute. So when you look at your Garmin watch, you'll typically see a little sign that says ml/kg/minute. That's what that all means. At the end of the day, this test is just trying to identify how well you consume and use the oxygen you're taking in. And to do this, they basically just put a mask on you and put you through a full-on sufferfest. That mask is connected to a tube that goes off to a really expensive fancy machine that can give you all this data. And the way they perform this test after you get that mask on is they throw you on a treadmill and they start you at a pretty casual pace, which for me was 6.8 miles per hour or 8:49 minute mile. It's not a pace that's like super hard, but it's also not super easy either. After that, they increase the incline of the treadmill every 1 minute, basically until you fail. You tap out or you quit. I think you're getting it now, but the idea here is to push yourself as hard as you can, as far as you can during this test to identify your true VO2 max. And it was a doozy. The VO2 Max test started pretty easy. I mean, it should have. The pace was pretty chill, and I wasn't exerting myself that hard. However, as the incline of the treadmill started to increase, simulating running uphill, I was really taxing myself. Before the test, Evan did make one grave mistake. He told me that most people last between 6 minutes and 12 minutes, and at that point I sort of gamified this whole experience because I wanted to go as long as possible and not just fail at like that 6-minute mark. So after 6% on the incline, I was working hard and I survived all the way up into 12%. 12% of incline at an 8:49 pace, minute per mile pace, and by the end of it, I was really, I was struggling.
Good push.
Good job. Good job.
I feel like I could have hung on a little longer. And honestly, it's a tough balance because you've got this mask on your face. You don't know if you're gonna like puke in the mask. You don't know, like there's a lot of fluids going on and you can't really see down because of the hose coming out of the mask. So your mental state does come into play here, and they do tell you that. So I was trying to hang in there and ignore all the other factors. So what were my VO2 max results? That's probably why you clicked on this video. Well, coming into this, my expectations were pretty low. Like I said, my training hasn't really been there, and my Garmin has been barking at me that my VO2 max keeps dropping and dropping over time, which has been really demoralized. However, I was pleasantly surprised to learn that at age 40, with my current fitness level, my VO2 max right now is 57 milliliters of oxygen per kilogram, which is significantly higher than I expected, and of course what my Garmin has been telling me. But again, more on that in another video and how that compares to all of my other wearables out there. What this does mean though is that my VO2 max at 57 does put me in the upper percentage for my age group. But VO2 max is not everything. As we learned with my lactate threshold test, I do have some improvements to make when it comes to my lactate threshold. When it comes to VO2 max, again, Human Powered Health did make some suggestions on how I could improve this. The moral of the story is I need to include more high intensity work on a weekly basis. I spend too much time in those zone 2, zone 3 runs. I don't really focus on doing those high interval runs, and he suggested that I put in at least 20% of my total running. That should include VO2 max workouts at a higher threshold pace. After all of these tests, we did sit down and have a powwow and go through all this data and walk through all of the suggestions. And when it comes to VO2 max, they told me that they're pretty confident that if I follow a structured workout and do more threshold training, this should push me into the lower 60s when it comes to my VO2 max by the time my races come up. And that would be really awesome, especially for a guy at my age at 40 years old. So that's all of the test data and all of my results from this particular day and my experience. Now, the really cool thing about Human Powered Health specifically when it comes to all these tests is that after the fact, they email you a link where you can access your Human Powered Health dashboard to see all this data in one place. You see your lactate threshold, your VO2 max, your running gait analysis, videos from you being there. It's really awesome. And not only that, if you go back at a later date, when you think you've improved in some of these areas, they can actually trend that over time. So if you see your VO2 max go up, you can see your previous VO2 max and where you stand now and in the future. So the more you go back, the more data you'll get, which is really cool. And that leads us into the final segment of this video and sort of the conclusion, whether or not you should do this sort of testing. That's kind of a mixed bag. First of all, you have to know what you're getting out of it. If you're just a casual runner, you don't really have any goals, you're not racing, I don't really know the value of knowing all this data unless you're a data nerd like me and you're just curious what your VO2 max is. On the flip side, if you are somebody who's an aspiring athlete or you're actively racing and trying to improve on your personal best, that's where these tests can become very insightful, especially from a place like Human Powered Health, where they do come up with a whole bunch of suggestions on how you can get better over time, which I really appreciate. In summary, I would say just know what you want to get out of it before you sign up for something like this. But for me personally, this whole experience has been really insightful, and in particular at Human Powered Health, it was awesome. The whole day was great. It was professional. It was clean. The staff was friendly, and I had an overall great experience. So if you're looking to get this kind of testing done and see some of the data that I shared with you today, definitely check out Human Powered Health in the description down below. Again, not sponsored, no affiliation with them. I don't get any kickbacks if you sign up or not. I just thought It was really interesting. And with that, we have made it to the end of this long-winded video. And keep in mind that down the road, I will be doing more testing like this to see where I stand when I get closer to race day. So stay tuned for that. And now I want to hear from you in the comments down below. Have you done testing like this? What were your results? Did you gain some insight or any valuable data from doing the testing? Where did you go? Where in the world are you? And what facility did you use? I'd love to learn all about that in the comments down below. And of course, as always, if you found this video fun, helpful, entertaining, anything, please consider going down and giving me a thumbs up and subscribing to the channel down below. That really helps me out. It helps me keep making videos like this. And after you do that, also check out all the links in the description down below over to my podcast, my Instagram, my Threads account, my Strava, and of course, my merch store where you can get a sweet hoodie like this, or yeah, a hat like that. Check that out. Chase the Summit. All right, friends, that's the end for this one. I hope you enjoyed it, and I will see you in the next one. Bye.
Good
I feel like I could have hung out a little longer.